The Charleston Baby Swap Mystery, Part 1. A stormy night in Charleston, South Carolina. Rain pounding against the tall windows of a mansion so grand it looked like a palace. Inside, two women screamed in labor. One was a French countess wrapped in silks. The other was her enslaved maid, hidden away in a cottage just yards from the main house. By dawn, both women's newborns had vanished. In their cribs lay babies that were not their own, infants who would grow up to inherit fortunes, names, and legacies they were never meant to claim. That one desperate night in 1831 set off a chain of lies that stretched across 3 decades. It involved forged papers, secret deals, suspicious deaths, and a conspiracy so twisted that when the truth finally came out in 1865, it shook the very foundations of Charleston's elite society. And here's the chilling part. The real evidence that could have proven everything, the letters, the court files, the birth records, all went up in flames during a mysterious fire in 1923. Almost like someone wanted this story buried forever. But tonight, we're digging it back up. Welcome to the Charleston Baby Swap Mystery. This is Part 1. Charleston, 1831. The jewel of the South. Charleston in the 1830s was America's southern crown jewel. Cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages, and rows of enormous mansions shaded by live oaks draped in Spanish moss. This was the heart of the cotton aristocracy, the place where wealth and power flowed in from rice fields and plantations worked by enslaved labor. At the center of it all stood the Pemberton estate, a 3-story Georgian-style mansion that took up an entire city block on East Bay Street. From its windows, you could see the harbor where ships unloaded European luxuries, fine wine, French furniture, and Parisian gowns, for Charleston's richest families. The master of this domain was Colonel Harrison Pemberton, a powerful man of 52. He wasn't just rich, he was respected, feared, and deeply embedded in Charleston's social circles. He owned 3,000 acres of land, sat on the city council, and threw dinner parties that attracted politicians and even visiting European nobility. But it wasn't the colonel that Charleston society whispered about. It was his wife, the countess. Her name was Margot de Villefort, a French countess who had fled Europe after the political upheavals of 1830. She was 28, stunningly beautiful, and carried herself with a grace that made other plantation wives look plain by comparison. Margot spoke 4 languages, played piano like a concert musician, and wore gowns straight from Paris. She was the kind of woman who could silence an entire ballroom with just a glance. But she wasn't alone when she came to Charleston. Alongside her was Celeste, her personal attendant. Celeste wasn't like the other enslaved people in the household. She could read and write both French and English, and she had the kind of light complexion and refined features that often led visitors to mistake her for a free woman of color. The Countess had taught her these skills during their Atlantic voyage, and the two women were often seen in quiet conversation, speaking French that no one else in the house could understand. Secrets in the mansion. Now, Colonel Pemberton was a powerful man, but like many men of his class, he had what polite society called plantation habits. He was known to make nightly visits to the slave quarters. Nobody spoke of it openly, but everyone knew. And soon, the whispers began about Celeste. The colonel had started calling her into his study under the excuse of helping with correspondence. Nights grew later. Doors stayed shut. By autumn of 1830, the household staff already suspected the truth. Celeste was carrying the colonel's child. But she wasn't the only one. The countess herself had fallen under the spell of another man, a French doctor named Jean-Baptiste Rousseau. He was handsome, intelligent, and a revolutionary exile who once published writings against slavery back in France. In Charleston, he kept those views quiet while building a wealthy medical practice. His visits to the mansion grew more frequent. Officially, he came to treat the countess for nervous conditions. In reality, the two spent hours behind closed doors speaking rapid French, their connection deepening with each meeting. By the end of the year, both women, one mistress, one slave, were visibly pregnant. 2 pregnancies, one terrible secret. Margot, the countess, announced her pregnancy with joy. Colonel Pemberton beamed in public, proud of the heir he thought was his. Charleston's social elite showered them with congratulations. But Celeste's condition was quietly handled. The Countess arranged for her to move into a small cottage on the mansion grounds. It was presented as a kindness, a way for her, maid, to rest. In truth, it kept her out of sight. What nobody dared to say out loud was this: the Countess's child belonged to Dr. Rousseau. Celeste's child belonged to the Colonel. If this truth ever got out, it would have been catastrophic. The Countess would be ruined, cast out of society. Celeste risked losing her child forever, sold away, as so many mixed-race children were. So, the two women began whispering in corners, having tense, private talks in the garden. They were bound together now by a secret that could destroy them both. The storm of March 15, 1831. On the night of March 15, the heavens themselves seemed to turn violent. A storm rolled into Charleston, rattling the Pemberton mansion to its very foundation. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder shook the chandeliers. The harbor churned as ships strained at their anchors. Inside, both women went into labor, almost at the same time. In the main house, the Countess gripped the bedpost, her silk nightgown plastered to her skin with sweat. Her contractions came fast, her cries echoing through the candlelit halls. In the cottage, Celeste labored too, attended by Mama Ruth, the elderly midwife who had delivered dozens of enslaved children. Her wrinkled hands moved with practiced calm, even as the storm howled outside. And then, just after midnight, Rousseau arrived, his black medical bag clutched tight against the downpour. He hurried to the Countess's chambers, his face pale with worry. What happened in the next few hours is a story that would ripple across 34 years of Southern history. By sunrise, both women's infants were gone. In their cribs lay children who were not their own. And no one outside that house would ever know the difference. Right finger, this is just the beginning. In part 2, we'll uncover the shocking pact made between the Countess and her maid, and the first cracks in the carefully built lie that would haunt the Pemberton family for generations. The Charleston Baby Swap Mystery, Part 2. Studio microphone. Picture this. A thunderstorm rages over Charleston. Inside the grand Pemberton mansion, a countess screams through labor pains. In a small cottage just a stone's throw away, her enslaved maid also fights to bring life into the world. 2 births. 2 babies. One secret so dangerous it could destroy everyone. And before the sun rose over Charleston that March morning in 1831, those 2 children were switched. One was handed a future of wealth and power. The other, a lifetime of chains. This is where the conspiracy truly began. The Colonel waits below. While the women labored upstairs, Colonel Harrison Pemberton sat in his study, pouring himself another brandy. Like most Southern gentlemen of his time, he kept his distance from childbirth. That business was left to women and doctors. The storm outside shook the windows. Rain hammered against the glass. Every crash of thunder rattled the chandeliers. Upstairs, the Countess clutched the bedposts, gasping, perhaps this storm is an omen. Beside her, Jean-Baptiste Rousseau worked calmly, though his hands trembled slightly. He spoke in French, reassuring her. Storms often accompany births. Nature seems to understand the importance of such nights. But his heart pounded. He knew what was at stake. Parallel struggles. Across the property, in a small cottage, Celeste bit down on a strip of leather to muffle her cries. The walls were thin. She couldn't risk the Colonel, or anyone else, hearing her screams. Beside her was Mama Ruth, the elderly midwife who had delivered half the children in Charleston's plantation families. At 73, her wrinkled hands carried a lifetime of knowledge. She had seen countless births, countless secrets. But tonight, even her experience would be tested. Back in the mansion, the Countess's cries echoed against the storm. Out in the cottage, Celeste's pain was silent, hidden. 2 women, 2 lives, both delivering babies within the same hour. The first birth. Just before dawn, as the storm began to calm, the Countess's baby arrived. Dr. Rousseau held the child carefully, the flicker of candlelight falling across the infant's tiny features. His breath caught. The baby girl had olive-toned skin and dark hair. A child who clearly carried his blood, not the colonel's. This was no Pemberton heir. "This is my daughter," he whispered in French, his voice heavy. And with those words came the truth. This child was living proof of the Countess's betrayal. If the colonel ever saw her, everything would collapse. The second birth. Less than an hour later, in the cottage, Celeste gave birth to a son. Mama Ruth cleaned the newborn, her sharp eyes studying his face. And then she saw it, the nose. That distinctive Pemberton nose she had seen before, 3 generations back when she delivered the colonel himself. This boy was undeniably the colonel's blood. The irony was brutal. The Countess had given birth to the doctor's child. The enslaved maid had given birth to the colonel's heir. The impossible choice. By sunrise, both women sat with their babies, each knowing the truth spelled disaster. The Countess stared at her daughter, realizing she could never present this child to her husband. One look at the girl's features, and whispers of adultery would tear her world apart. Celeste cradled her son, knowing that no matter his pale skin, no matter his father's blood, he was still enslaved by law. His destiny would be to work, obey, and live without freedom. That's when Dr. Rousseau returned to the Countess's room, his voice quiet but firm. "We must face reality," he said. "Your husband expects to see a son and heir. If he sees this girl..." The Countess shook her head, her amber eyes filling with tears. "I know what you suggest, but how could such a thing be done?" The answer came from the doorway. Mama Ruth's solution. The old midwife stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying the weight of decades of secrets. "Miss Margot," she said softly, "there may be a way to protect both these babies." Her eyes moved from the sleeping girl in the Countess's arms to the boy in Celeste's. "Your maid's boy could pass as your son. And your daughter, she could grow up as Celeste's child. Both children would live. Both would be safe." The words hung in the air like smoke. It was monstrous. It was unthinkable. But it was also the only way forward. A pact in the morning light. Celeste was summoned to the mansion after the colonel left to inspect storm damage on his rice fields. She listened to the plan, her face unreadable. Finally, she asked the question that cut through the room. "What guarantee do I have? What stops you from taking my son and discarding me once the lie is in place?" The Countess met her eyes. For a moment, mistress and slave were equals. "Because we will both be trapped," Margot replied. "Your silence protects my daughter's life. My protection secures your son's future. Betrayal destroys us both." Celeste nodded slowly. She had no illusions about fairness in this world. But for her son, her only son, she would take the risk. Dr. Rousseau agreed to alter the records. He would sign as attending physician for both births but record only one child for the Countess, a healthy boy. Mama Ruth swaddled the infants. With practiced hands, she made the switch. The exchange. When Colonel Pemberton returned later that morning, he was introduced to his son, the fair-skinned boy with his own family nose. Pride filled his eyes. His heir, his legacy secured. No suspicion crossed his mind. Meanwhile, in the cottage, Celeste held the baby girl that was truly the Countess's child. A girl who would live her life enslaved, never knowing she carried noble blood. The Countess, in turn, clutched the boy who was not hers. Her husband's bloodline in her arms. A child who would grow up believing he was her own flesh and blood. And in that moment, something dark took root in her heart, a possessive love that would shape her every move for the next 34 years. Right finger in part 3, we'll see how the secret begins to spread its cracks through the Pemberton household. Jealousy, whispers, and the first suspicious death. Because when you build a future on lies, the ghosts of the truth always find a way to return. Part 3, The Children of Secrets. Studio microphone, hook. Imagine living in a grand mansion where every polished floorboard, every gilded frame, and every whispered conversation hides a deadly secret. A secret so dangerous that, if uncovered, it could destroy not only a family's fortune but also its very name. Tonight, we step deeper into the Pemberton household, where 2 children grow up under the weight of lies, love, and a curse of truth that refuses to stay buried. Colonel Pemberton believed he had everything a Southern aristocrat could want: wealth, land, power, and now, a son to carry on the family name. The boy was called Charles Harrison Pemberton, named proudly after his grandfather. From the very beginning, everyone said Charles was the perfect heir. He had the pale skin, the fine features, and the bearing of someone born into privilege. Visitors looked at him and said, "Why, he is the very image of his father." The colonel beamed with pride. His dynasty was secure, or so he thought. But what the guests at those glittering dinners did not know, was that this child's very identity was a carefully constructed lie. A deception born on a stormy March night. Shadows in the nursery. While Charles grew into a handsome toddler, the Countess's heart belonged to another child, Marie, the daughter of Celeste, a house slave. Officially, Marie was listed as the property of the Pembertons. In reality, she was the Countess's own flesh and blood. The Countess could not abandon her. She insisted Marie be raised alongside Charles. "He needs a companion," she explained to skeptical relatives. "And the girl is remarkably intelligent." People whispered behind fans at social gatherings. Some said the French-born Countess spoiled her slaves far too much. Others muttered that no good could come of educating a girl who was meant to serve. But the Countess ignored them. And so, in the nursery of the Grand Pemberton mansion, two children grew up side by side. Charles, the heir, destined for glory, and Marie, the shadow child, kept close, yet never truly acknowledged. A dangerous bond. The two children were inseparable. By the time they were 5 years old, they seemed almost to share one mind. They finished each other's sentences, played in perfect harmony, and even comforted each other in silence, as if they could feel one another's thoughts. This bond terrified the adults. Celeste, who worked in the mansion as head of staff, watched her secret son Charles with aching pride, and Marie with guilt that cut like a knife. For every privilege Charles received, Marie paid the price. Dr. Rousseau, the family's trusted physician, and the third conspirator in this deception, saw the danger too. He noticed how Charles's questions grew sharper. "Why is my hair lighter than Cousin Edmund's? Why does my skin not tan like the others?" The Countess smoothed over his doubts with half-truths, but Charles was no ordinary child. He was gifted, too gifted. By the age of 5, he read Latin with ease, played piano like a young prodigy, and solved arithmetic problems that left his tutors speechless. But it was his curiosity, his relentless hunger for truth, that frightened his mother most. Whispers of rebellion. Charleston society had begun to notice. The Countess allowed Marie to wear fine dresses, sit at lessons, even eat at the family table when no guests were around. "Too much indulgence," whispered Mrs. Whitlock at tea. "Mark my words, a slave who forgets her place is a danger to us all." These whispers reached the colonel. One evening, as the fire burned low in his study, he confronted his wife. "Margot," he said coldly, "I hear troubling things. You've taken too great a liking to that mulatto girl. Neighbors talk. It shames our name." The Countess's blood ran cold. Marie is only a companion for Charles. A clever girl, good for his education. But the colonel cut her off. "Educated slaves become rebellious slaves. If you care for our family's reputation, you'll put an end to this foolishness." The message was clear. The Countess was walking a razor's edge. The terrible choice. That night, she summoned Celeste in secret. Her voice trembled, though her face remained composed. "Marie must be sold," she whispered. "My husband suspects too much. If she stays, everything falls apart." Celeste staggered back as if struck. "You promised. You swore she would be safe." Tears burned the Countess's eyes. "I'll see her placed in Savannah, with a kind family. She'll be educated, protected. It's the only way to keep her alive." The cruel irony was unbearable. To protect the son she had stolen, she would have to sacrifice the daughter she had birthed. And so, in 1837, 6-year-old Marie was quietly sold to the wealthy Carrington family. The Countess paid them well to ensure she would be treated kindly, but the truth was still bitter: her daughter was gone. The heir in mourning. Charles's grief was uncontrollable. He ran after the wagon carrying Marie away, screaming, "Bring back my sister! She is my sister!" The plantation neighbors heard his cries. They exchanged knowing glances. The Pemberton household, they whispered, was not as it seemed. From that day forward, Charles was never the same. His laughter faded. His studies grew darker, more intense. By 8, he mastered Latin. By 9, he argued legal theories with men twice his age. But his heart remained hollow. Worse, he developed an uncanny sense for lies. He could look an adult in the eye and know when they were hiding something. The Countess, desperate, poured all her energy into molding him into a future leader. But Charles had begun to turn his sharp, relentless gaze on her. "Mother," he asked one morning, "why do you watch me so closely when you think I'm not looking? You look afraid." Her breath caught. All mothers watch their children. But Charles shook his head. "Not like you. You look at me as if I might vanish. As if I make you sad." "Why would I make you sad?" The boy's questions grew more dangerous by the day. The unlocked drawer. In the summer of 1840, when Charles was 9 years old, the first crack in the wall appeared. He was exploring the mansion's library when he found something his mother had carelessly left behind, a bundle of private letters. Among them was one written by Dr. Rousseau, years earlier, on that stormy night when everything began. And in that single moment, the careful deception that had lasted nearly a decade, was about to collapse. Fire. End of Part 3. Do you want me to continue polishing Part 4 in the same suspenseful, YouTube horror storytelling style, picking up right from when Charles discovers Rousseau's letter? Part 4. The letter in the library. Studio microphone hook. What if everything you believed about yourself, your family, your future, even your very name, was a lie? Imagine being a child of privilege, raised to inherit wealth and power, only to stumble upon a single piece of paper that shatters your world. Tonight, in the shadowed halls of the Pemberton mansion, young Charles uncovers the truth his family has fought to bury for nearly a decade. The discovery. It was a humid afternoon in the summer of 1840. The air outside buzzed with cicadas, but inside the mansion, all was silent. Charles had been left alone in the library, his favorite sanctuary. The tall shelves of leather-bound volumes always drew him in, but this time his curiosity led him elsewhere, toward his mother's writing desk. Normally locked, it now stood slightly ajar. At first, Charles only meant to peek. But one folded letter, left carelessly among the papers, caught his eye. The ink had faded, but the signature leapt out. Drive. Rousseau. Charles knew Rousseau well, his mother's friend, his family's doctor. Why would he be writing such a personal letter? Heart pounding, the boy unfolded the page. Words that should not be read. The letter was brief, but every sentence cut like a knife. It spoke of the 2 infants born on that storm-tossed night. Of the delicate matter of exchanging their identities. Of ensuring that the heir of the Pemberton line was presented to society without suspicion. Charles read the lines again and again, each word pressing deeper into his young mind. 2 infants, a switch, a deception to protect the family name. The meaning crashed over him. His very existence, the privileges he enjoyed, the future laid before him, was built on a lie. A child's fury. When the Countess entered the library moments later, she froze at the sight of the paper trembling in her son's hands. "What is this?" Charles demanded. His voice, though still a boy's, rang with authority. "What infants? What switch?" The Countess's blood drained from her face. For years, she had rehearsed lies and half-truths, but she had not prepared for this. "Charles," she began softly, "you should not have read that. You cannot understand." But Charles cut her off. "Then explain it to me. Am I the child, or am I the lie?" The room seemed to close in around them. The oil lamps flickered though no breeze stirred. In that moment, the boy's piercing eyes looked older than his years, hungry, relentless, demanding answers. Ghosts in the house. From that day, the Pemberton mansion no longer felt safe. Shadows seemed longer, corners darker. Charles wandered the halls at night, sleepless, muttering questions to himself. The servants. whispered that he was haunted by the spirit of the girl sold away, his sister. Some claimed they heard him speaking to her in the dark, as if her ghost lingered by his side. Celeste, watching from the sidelines, felt her heart pound with both fear and hope. Did Charles somehow sense the truth? Did he know Marie was more than just a companion? The Countess, however, sank deeper into dread. Every glance from her son felt like an interrogation. Every question carried a threat, that the truth might burst forth and destroy them all. Rousseau's warning. Desperate, the Countess turned once again to Dr. Rousseau. She showed him the letter, begged him to help. The doctor frowned deeply. This is dangerous, Margot. The boy is too clever. If he continues to pry, the whole deception will collapse. You cannot expect a child with such gifts to accept vague answers forever. What should I do? She whispered. Rousseau hesitated. Perhaps it is time he learns part of the truth. A softened version, enough to quiet him. But if you continue lying outright, his suspicion will grow darker. But the Countess could not bring herself to confess. The risk was too great. Instead, she doubled her vigilance, watching Charles more closely, locking away every document, monitoring every word spoken in the household. Yet the harder she tried to control him, the more he slipped beyond her grasp. The boy who saw too much. Charles grew silent, but his silence was more dangerous than questions. He began to watch. He studied faces, movements, tones of voice. He could tell when Celeste looked at him with too much tenderness. He could tell when his mother's smile was forced. He even began asking servants casual questions about the year of his birth, about the storm, about who was in the house that night. Each answer was catalogued in his sharp young mind. And at night, the nightmares came. He dreamed of two cradles side by side, one child lifted into the arms of wealth, the other carried into darkness. He would wake in a cold sweat, convinced he had lived both lives. A gathering storm. Meanwhile, whispers outside the mansion grew louder. Plantation neighbors still talked of the strange attachment the Countess had shown to Marie before her disappearance. Some wondered aloud if there had been more to the girl's role in the household. The colonel, increasingly uneasy, ordered stricter discipline among the slaves and kept a closer watch on his wife. But he remained blind to the truth gnawing at the very heart of his family. By 1841, Charles was 10 years old, brilliant, restless, and consumed by questions no one dared answer. The bond he had once shared with Marie had transformed into an obsession. She was my sister, he still insisted to anyone who would listen. And you will never convince me otherwise. The haunting. Strange events began to plague the mansion. Windows rattled with no wind. Doors creaked open at night. Servants swore they saw a young girl's figure drifting through the halls, her hair dark, her eyes mournful. Charles, standing in the candlelit corridors, whispered into the shadows, "Marie, is that you?" The Countess dismissed it as childish imagination. But Celeste knew better. She believed the children's bond was so strong it had crossed distance itself, that Marie's spirit, whether alive in Savannah or not, was somehow tied to her brother. And Charles, caught between genius and madness, seemed determined to uncover what bound them. The threat within. One evening, as thunder rolled over Charleston once again, Charles confronted his mother in the drawing room. "I know you are hiding something," he said quietly, but with the force of an adult. "Every time I speak her name, you flinch. Every time I ask about the night I was born, you turn pale. You cannot keep the truth from me forever." The Countess's hands shook so violently she dropped her glass. In that instant, she realized the deception was no longer a fragile game of appearances. It had become a war, between the truth her son demanded, and the lies she clung to. The final line crossed. And then, came the moment that would change everything. Late one night, Charles returned to the library, carrying a candle. He went straight to the desk, forced open the locked drawer, and pulled out a bundle of hidden documents. Among them, tucked beneath layers of letters and receipts, was something he should never have seen. Marie's bill of sale, her name, her age, her description, written proof that she had once been part of this household, before being sold away like common property. Charles's hand shook as he read. Tears burned his eyes. But behind those tears came something else, rage. He turned, holding the paper high, and screamed into the empty room. You lied to me. You lied about everything. His voice echoed through the mansion like a curse. And from that moment, the walls of deception that had held for 10 long years, began to crack. Fire. End of part 4. Do you want me to continue with part 5, where Charles, now consumed with suspicion and haunted visions of Marie, begins to investigate his family's darkest secret, leading the story into even more gothic horror? Part 5: The Curse of Bloodlines. Studio microphone hook. What happens when a lie, buried for a decade, begins to claw its way back into the light? Secrets don't stay silent forever, especially not when blood, betrayal, and fate are involved. Tonight, young Charles Pemberton steps deeper into a labyrinth of family deception, and what he discovers may doom the entire Pemberton name. A boy transformed. The night Charles found Marie's bill of sale, something inside him snapped. He was no longer the innocent child everyone believed him to be. The document proved beyond doubt that his sister had been sold like livestock. Worse, it suggested that his mother and Dr. Rousseau had hidden the truth about her importance. From that night forward, Charles carried himself differently. Servants whispered that he walked like a man decades older, his back straight, his gaze unyielding. His eyes, once bright with childish wonder, now seemed darker, sharper, as if they saw through lies with ease. The Countess, watching her son, felt a terror deeper than any storm. It was no longer just about protecting appearances. Charles had become a hunter of truth, and his prey was her secret. Questions that cut. At breakfast the next morning, Charles stared across the table at his mother. His tone was polite, but every word dripped with accusation. Mother, why did you never tell me Marie was sold? Why keep her existence hidden? Was it shame, or fear? The Countess's spoon rattled against her china. Children do not need to know every detail of household matters, she managed to say. Charles leaned forward. But I am not a child anymore. And Marie was not a servant to me. She was my sister. You cannot deny it. The Colonel looked up sharply. Your sister? Absurd. That girl was a slave. Do not speak such foolishness at my table. But Charles did not back down. His voice was calm, deliberate. If she was nothing more than a slave, why did Mother weep when she was sold? Why did she treat her differently from the others? The Colonel slammed his fist on the table, silencing the room. Yet even his booming voice could not erase the truth. Charles was not going to let this matter rest. Celeste's fear. Celeste, who had quietly entered the room to pour coffee, froze when she heard the boy's words. He was circling, closer to the secret than ever before. That night, she went to the Countess's chamber, her voice low but urgent. He knows too much, she warned. He will find the truth, and when he does, it will destroy us all. The Countess pressed her hand to her forehead. What can I do? If I confess, I lose everything. If I lie, he will see through me. Celeste's eyes were wet with fury and pain. You promised Marie would be safe. Instead, she was cast away. And now Charles carries the ghost of her absence. Perhaps this is justice. The Countess's face hardened. Justice. Or a curse. The haunting deepens. Strange events began to grow worse. Charles claimed he heard Marie's laughter in the hallways at night. Once, he swore he saw her reflection in the glass of his window, though no one stood outside. Servants reported finding his toys arranged in pairs, as if by invisible hands, 2 dolls, 2 blocks, 2 candles, always side by side. One evening, Charles announced at dinner, Marie has not left. She is here with me. She will not let me forget. The Colonel roared at him to stop his nonsense, but even he began to avoid the upper floors after dark, muttering about unnatural chills and childish foolishness best left unspoken. Rousseau's unease. When Dr. Rousseau visited, Charles cornered him. You were there the night I was born. You wrote the letter. I've seen it. The doctor stiffened. You should not meddle in matters beyond your understanding. But Charles pressed on. Tell me the truth, doctor. Who am I? And why does my heart tell me Marie is not gone from me? Rousseau's lips trembled. For years he had carried the burden of their pact. Looking into the boy's piercing eyes, he nearly confessed. But fear of ruin sealed his tongue. Your imagination misleads you, he whispered, though his own hands shook. Leave the past where it belongs. Charles only smiled faintly. The past does not want to be left. It follows me, doctor. Every night. A mother's desperation. The Countess grew more frantic with each passing day. Her headaches worsened. She began consuming laudanum to calm her nerves, yet the visions would not stop. In mirrors, she thought she saw Marie's eyes staring back. In her dreams, she heard a child's cry, sometimes Charles's, sometimes Marie's, always echoing from the storm of that long-ago night. One night, half delirious, she confessed aloud to Celeste, I fear I love them both too much. Perhaps God has cursed me for switching them. Perhaps the devil himself marks this house. Celeste, with tears sliding down her cheeks, whispered, it was never God's will to play with children's fates. And now the price is being paid. Charleston whispers. Meanwhile, Charleston society continued to whisper about the Pemberton household. Neighbors noted the boy's uncanny intelligence and his stubborn talk of a sister. They exchanged glances, suggesting scandal. Rumors reached even Savannah, where Marie lived under the Carringtons. Some claimed she too was plagued by visions, waking at night and insisting her brother was calling to her from afar. The bond between the children, though torn by distance, seemed unbreakable, almost supernatural. The Forbidden Room. In late 1841, Charles made another discovery. While exploring the unused upper rooms of the mansion, he found a locked trunk covered in dust. With determination, he pried it open. Inside were relics of his infancy, baby clothes, birth records, and swaddling blankets. But what chilled him most was the presence of 2 sets of garments, 2 cradles worth of memory, preserved as if for 2 children. Holding the tiny dress that had once belonged to Marie, he whispered, so it's true. We were both here. We were both meant to live under this roof. The candle in his hand flickered violently, though the air was still. Charles thought he heard a girl's voice, soft as a breath, brother. He dropped the dress and stumbled back, his heart hammering. The Colonel's wrath. When the Colonel learned that Charles had been snooping in the locked rooms, his fury knew no bounds. You dishonor this house with your obsession, he thundered, striking the boy across the face. You will forget that girl. Do you hear me? Forget her. But Charles, clutching his cheek, looked up with eyes burning with defiance. You may silence me, father. But you cannot silence the truth. She is my blood. She will not be forgotten. The Colonel stormed away, muttering about discipline and weakness. But his hand shook as he poured his whiskey. He could not shake the boy's words. The Omen. That night, another storm broke over Charleston, eerily similar to the one a decade earlier. Lightning flashed across the plantation, thunder rattled the mansion's foundations. Charles lay awake, gripping the dress he had taken from the trunk. The Countess knelt in prayer, begging God to forgive her deception. Celeste sat silently in her quarters, eyes fixed on the storm, knowing fate was circling closer. And then, over the roar of wind and rain, every person in the house heard it. A child's cry, not Charles, not any living child, but a voice from somewhere deeper, somewhere darker. The servants crossed themselves. The Colonel shouted for silence. But Charles rose from his bed, whispering, Marie, she's come back. And in that moment, every soul in the Pemberton household realized. The past was no longer just haunting them. It was coming to claim them. End of Part 5. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, where the haunting becomes undeniable, mirrors cracking, shadows moving, and Charles taking dangerous steps to seek out Marie and Savannah? Part 6, The Return of Shadows. Studio microphone, hook. What if the dead refused to rest, and the living could no longer escape their call? The storm has broken over Charleston, but its thunder carries more than rain. It carries the voice of a child who was lost, and a secret that refuses to stay buried. Tonight, Charles Pemberton takes his first steps into a darkness that threatens to consume him, and his family's name. A cry in the storm. The echoes of the child's cry lingered long after the thunder faded. Servants swore the sound came from the nursery, long abandoned. The colonel raged through the house, lantern in hand, flinging open doors and shouting. Nothing is there. You're letting madness twist your ears. But when the colonel opened the nursery door, the air inside was ice cold. The rocking chair moved back and forth, creaking steadily, though no hand touched it. The servants fled. Celeste whispered prayers under her breath. Charles, however, stepped forward, his small face pale but determined. She is calling for me. A house on edge. The storm left damage across the plantation. Roof tiles shattered, trees split, windows blown open. But greater damage was done inside the family itself. The colonel ordered that the nursery be locked again, vowing no one would speak of phantoms. Yet the servants whispered of seeing a girl's shadow slip across the upstairs hallway, hair falling to her shoulders like Marie's once had. The countess grew pale and sleepless. Laudanum bottles cluttered her bedside. Each night, she dreamed of 2 infants, one taken, one kept, and woke with the taste of salt tears on her lips. Celeste, moving silently through the house, felt the pull of something deeper. She lit candles at midnight, murmuring prayers, not to banish the spirit, but to beg it to be gentle. For in her heart, she did not fear Marie's return, she feared what vengeance Marie might bring. Charles's obsession. Charles began to change again. He no longer spent time with other children of Charleston's elite. Instead, he shut himself away with books, histories, journals, and even scraps of old ledgers he stole from his father's study. One evening, he confided to Celeste. I dream of her every night. Sometimes she is standing in water, calling for me. Sometimes she is trapped behind glass, her hands pressed against it. I cannot breathe until I answer her. Celeste, torn between love and fear, gripped his shoulders. Do not chase shadows, child. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. But Charles's jaw set with quiet defiance. Then I must open them. For if I do not, she will never rest, and neither will I. The colonel's decline. The colonel, once the commanding force of the household, began to unravel. He drank more heavily, muttering about, weakness spreading like a plague. One night, stumbling into the dining hall, he shouted at his wife. You coddled the boy, you filled his head with nonsense. And now he dishonors me with this talk of spirits. By God, I will have obedience in this house, or I will have nothing at all. The countess, trembling, whispered, perhaps it is not nonsense. Perhaps it is punishment. The colonel struck the table so hard his glass shattered, but he said no more. Even he could not deny that the shadows of the past were tightening around them. The vision in the glass. Weeks later, as autumn crept into Charleston, another sign appeared. Charles was studying by lamplight when he glanced into the mirror above his desk. At first, he saw only his reflection. But then, behind his own image, another face appeared. A girl's face, pale, with wide, searching eyes. His lamp flickered. The girl's lips moved soundlessly, then formed a single word that froze his blood. Brother. The mirror cracked from corner to corner. Charles stumbled back, but instead of terror, he felt a strange calm. He whispered aloud, yes, I will find you. Rousseau's warning. Charles sought out Drive, Rousseau once more. The physician tried to avoid him, but the boy confronted him outside the churchyard one Sunday. You know the truth. If you will not speak it, then the dead will. Which is worse? Rousseau's face went gray. He glanced at the gravestones, as if expecting them to stir. Finally, he spoke, his voice shaking. You must leave this alone. The past is a grave, and graves should not be disturbed. Charles leaned closer, his eyes unblinking. What if the grave has already been opened? The doctor hurried away, but his hands trembled so badly he could not mount his carriage at first. He knew the boy was right. Something unnatural had been unleashed, and it would not return to silence. The plan to travel. Charles began plotting in secret. He learned from stray comments that Marie was now living in Savannah with the Carringtons. Though his mother had forbidden discussion of her, Charles pieced the truth together. He began hiding coins in his room, saving what he could. He studied maps, tracing the road southward with his finger. Celeste discovered his plans one night when she found him folding the map beneath his pillow. "You cannot go," she begged. "Savannah is far, and the journey dangerous for a boy." But Charles looked at her with unwavering resolve. "I was born with her. I will die with her if I must. Do you not see? It is fate. A mother's last attempt." The Countess, sensing her son slipping further away, tried one last desperate act. She summoned him to her chamber, where candlelight flickered over her pale face. "Charles," she said softly, "there are truths a mother cannot speak. They are too heavy, too cruel. But know this, everything I did to protect you." Charles took her hand, his voice steady. "Then let me protect her." Tears filled her eyes. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, but said no more. For deep down, she knew the boy's course could not be changed. The night of departures. That winter's night, under a moon half hidden by clouds, Charles packed a small satchel. He carried the cracked fragment of the mirror wrapped in cloth, the tiny dress from the trunk, and the coins he had saved. Before dawn, he slipped quietly through the halls. But as he reached the main door, Celeste appeared, blocking his way. Her eyes were full of sorrow, but also pride. "If you go with my prayers. But remember, Charles, spirits are not bound by roads. They will follow you wherever you run." Charles embraced her, then stepped out into the cold night. His figure disappeared down the path, leaving the mansion in silence. Inside, the Countess awoke with a scream, clutching her chest. She had dreamed of two children standing together in the storm, their hands joined. And as thunder rolled again across Charleston, she knew her son was gone. The journey begins. Charles walked southward, every step heavy with both dread and purpose. He was no longer just a boy. He was a seeker of truth, bound to the spirit of the sister he had lost. Behind him, the Pemberton mansion creaked and groaned under the weight of its sins. Servants whispered that the nursery door now rattled by itself each night, as though someone on the other side demanded to be let in. And ahead, in Savannah, Marie Carrington lay awake in her own bed, heart pounding, certain she had heard a voice calling her name through the dark. The storm had not ended. It was only moving closer. End of Part 6. Do you want me to make Part 7 more focused on Charles and Marie's first meeting in Savannah, with eerie coincidences, strange mirrors of fate, and the curse tightening, or should Part 7 first show Marie's side of the haunting before they reunite? Part 7 The Twin Flame. Studio microphone, hook. What if someone you've never met shared your dreams, your fears, and even your face? What if your soul was forever tied to theirs, through secrets too dark to confess? Tonight, in Savannah, Marie Carrington begins to feel the shadow of her true family. And a brother she does not know walks toward her in silence. Life in Savannah. Marie Carrington grew up believing she was the cherished daughter of the Carrington household. Her adoptive mother, Isabella, dressed her in fine silks and paraded her through Savannah's drawing rooms. To the world, she was a young lady of promise and refinement. But behind the lace curtains and polished manners, Marie felt an emptiness she could never explain. She was restless, prone to wandering the garden alone, staring at the river as though waiting for someone to emerge from the mist. Her tutors praised her intelligence, yet often found her distracted, her amber eyes fixed on something invisible. "I feel as though someone is calling me," she once confessed to her governess. "But I do not know who." The governess laughed it away, but Marie never did. The strange dreams. By her 15th year, the dreams began. Always the same. A boy standing in a darkened hallway, holding out his hand. His eyes mirrored her own. "Find me," he whispered. Each time she woke gasping, clutching her chest. Isabella tried to soothe her, giving her lavender to calm her nerves. But no remedy eased the dreams. One night, the boy in the dream whispered something new, "Brother." Marie froze. She had no brother. At least, none she had been told of. Whispers in the house. The Carrington household was not without gossip. Servants whispered when they thought Marie could not hear. She caught fragments, not their blood, or from Charleston. When she pressed her adoptive father, he silenced her sharply. You are our daughter. That is all you need know. But doubt gnawed at her. Why did she look different from the Carringtons? Why did Isabella always flinch when asked about Marie's infancy? It was in these cracks of secrecy that the haunting grew stronger. The mirror at midnight. One night, unable to sleep, Marie lit a candle and gazed into her vanity mirror. At first, she saw only her reflection. Then the glass clouded, and another face formed beside hers, paler, sharper, but unmistakably like her own. She gasped, dropping the candle. The flame sputtered out, leaving her in darkness. But a voice lingered in her ear, "Sister." From that night on, the mirror in her room refused to stay clear. Always, faintly, she saw another presence waiting behind her own reflection. A secret illness. Isabella grew worried. Marie became pale, her appetite failing. Physicians diagnosed female hysteria, recommending rest and travel. But Marie knew it was not her body that was sick, it was her spirit. Her nights were full of whispers. Sometimes she felt a hand brush her shoulder, though no one stood near. Once, she woke to find her bedclothes damp, as though she had been standing in water. She wrote in her diary, "There is another life tethered to mine. I feel it pulling at me, stronger each day. If I do not follow, I shall go mad." Charles approaches. Meanwhile, Charles Pemberton pressed southward. He traveled by wagon when he could, on foot when he must. Every mile seemed guided by unseen forces. Birds wheeled above him at night. The cracked mirror fragment in his satchel sometimes glowed faintly in moonlight, though he dared not tell anyone. At roadside inns, travelers sometimes mistook him for another child they claimed to have seen. "Didn't we just see you in Savannah?" one merchant asked, frowning. Charles only smiled faintly. The twin bond was already at work. Marie's warning. One evening, Marie's dream changed. Instead of the boy calling to her, she saw him standing before a ruined house, flames licking the walls. His eyes were wide with terror. "They will not let us be," he cried. "Run before it's too late." She woke screaming, so loud that Isabella rushed into her chamber, clutching her night robe. Marie clung to her adoptive mother, sobbing, "Mama, someone is coming for me. Someone who looks like me. I know it. I cannot explain, but I know." Isabella paled, but instead of comforting her, she whispered, "Dear God, they have found us." The confession. The next day, Isabella summoned Marie privately. Her face was haggard, as though she had aged 10 years overnight. "Marie," she began, "there are truths you were never meant to know. We took you in to protect you, to give you safety. But safety has its limits. You are not of our blood." Marie's heart pounded. "Then whose am I?" Isabella trembled. "Charleston. A family with power, but also with shadows. Your true mother could not keep you. We swore to raise you as our own. But now, it seems the past refuses to remain buried." Marie felt the ground tilt beneath her. Everything she had known, every polite gathering, every prayer at the family pew, built upon lies. The arrival. That very week, Charles reached Savannah. He was ragged, his clothes torn from travel, but his eyes blazed with purpose. He asked for the Carrington estate by name, though no one had told him of it. When at last he reached the gate, he looked up at the grand house and whispered, "She is here." Inside, Marie froze. She was standing by the window when a sudden, inexplicable certainty struck her. She rushed to the glass. Outside, through the iron gate, she saw him, her mirror image, staring back at her. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled against the windowpane. The boy lifted his hand in silent greeting. And though she had never seen him before, Marie whispered the word that rose unbidden to her lips. "Brother." Shadows gather. The servants gaped, crossing themselves. Isabella fainted, and Marie, without thought, ran toward the door. For the first time, the two halves of the secret, the son and the daughter, stood only steps away from each other. But as Charles reached for the gate, the air grew heavy, the sky darkened, and thunder rumbled though no storm had been forecast. The past was no longer content to whisper. It was coming for them both. Fire. End of Part 7. Do you want Part 8 to show Charles and Marie's first true meeting and the explosion of supernatural horrors around them, or should it shift back to Charleston to show how the Colonel and Countess react when they discover Charles has vanished? Part 8. The Blood That Binds. Studio microphone hook. What happens when two souls, separated at birth, finally stand face to face? For Charles and Marie, the truth is not a joyful reunion, it is a doorway to something darker. Tonight, the secret their mothers buried comes clawing back from the grave. The first meeting. The gate creaked open as if pushed by invisible hands. Charles stepped inside the Carrington estate, his face pale with exhaustion but burning with recognition. Marie hurried down the front steps, her silk gown catching on the banister. They stopped only inches apart. Neither spoke at first. Instead, they stared into each other's eyes, the same amber shade, flecked with gold, uncanny in their mirror-like symmetry. Finally, Marie whispered, You were in my dreams." Charles nodded slowly. "And you were in mine. All my life." The world seemed to fall silent around them. Even the cicadas stilled, as though nature itself was holding its breath. Isabella's terror. Isabella Carrington stumbled out after her daughter, pale as chalk. She grabbed Marie's arm and pulled her back. "No, child, do not touch him." Marie resisted. "Mama, he is my brother." Charles's eyes widened. "You knew." Isabella shook her head fiercely. "No more words. No more questions. You must leave, both of you. The past is awake now, and if you linger together, it will devour us all." Her words made little sense, but her terror was undeniable. The mirror shatters. That night, Marie and Charles met again in secret. She slipped from her chamber, candle in hand, and found him waiting in the stables. They talked for hours. Charles told her of Charleston, the whispers, the mirror, the pact of silence. Marie confessed her visions, her nightmares, her feeling of being watched through glass. When Charles pulled from his satchel the cracked mirror shard he carried, Marie gasped. "That is the same glass I see in my room. The same that shows me your face." As she touched it, the shard trembled. Then, without warning, it split into smaller fragments, scattering like ice across the stable floor. From the broken pieces, shadows poured out, long, skeletal hands crawling up the walls, reaching for the siblings. Marie screamed. Charles seized her hand, dragging her out as the horses whinnied in panic. Behind them, the stable lanterns blew out one by one, as if suffocated by unseen fingers. Haunted blood. The next morning, Isabella confessed the truth. She sat the two of them in the drawing room, her face drawn and defeated. "You are twins in spirit, though not in name. Born the same night, exchanged to protect your mothers from ruin. But such deception leaves scars, scars that fester." Her voice shook. "Blood cannot be fooled forever. It remembers. And it calls for payment." Charles leaned forward. "What kind of payment?" Isabella's eyes brimmed with tears. "A life. Always a life. The family that birthed you cheated fate, and fate will not rest until it is fed." The siblings exchanged horrified glances. The funeral procession. That week, Savannah was struck by an inexplicable tragedy. A servant boy in the Carrington house, barely 12, was found dead in the garden, his face frozen in terror, his body twisted as though he had fallen from a great height though no such fall had occurred. When Marie saw him, she fainted. For she recognized the boy's face, it was the same she had seen in her nightmare days before. Charles helped her recover, but both knew what it meant. The curse had begun to collect its debt. The Colonel arrives. Meanwhile, word of Charles's disappearance reached Charleston. Colonel Pemberton was furious. With his reputation at stake, he rode south with armed men, determined to drag his son back by force. But he was not the only one coming. Countess Margot, pale and frail, traveled secretly behind him, desperate to protect the fragile life she had lived for nearly 2 decades. Celeste, too, had sent word through the underground network of slaves. She could not abandon Marie, her true daughter, now that the past was clawing its way back into the open. Fate was moving all the players toward Savannah. The Night of Whispers. One evening, Charles and Marie sat together by candlelight, studying old Carrington ledgers, searching for any clue about the mirror, the curse, their bond. Suddenly, every candle in the house went out at once. The air turned icy. Whispers filled the halls, hundreds of voices speaking at once, impossible to understand yet suffocating in their urgency. The siblings clutched each other's hands. From the darkness of the parlor mirror, a figure stepped forward. It was a woman, her face veiled, her hands outstretched. Marie gasped, "Mother!" But the figure's voice was not Margot's. It was hollow, ancient, dripping with malice. "Blood lies must be paid. One twin must die, or both shall be claimed." The figure dissolved into smoke, vanishing back into the glass. The mirror cracked. Decision at dawn. The next morning, Isabella begged them to separate. "If you stay together, the curse will consume you both. Leave this house. Forget what you saw." But Charles refused. "We cannot run from what we are. This was decided the night we were born. Only by facing it can we break it." Marie, trembling, agreed. "If fate demands payment, then let us choose how it is given. We will not let it take us blindly." Their pact was sealed. The road to ruin. That night, Charles and Marie left the Carrington estate together. They walked toward the marshes, guided by instinct more than reason. Behind them, Isabella wept, clutching her rosary. She knew the children were right. The curse would not stop until it was confronted. Ahead of them, thunder rumbled though the skies were clear. The marsh water glistened as though lit from below, and in its surface, they saw not their reflections, but the faces of countless others, slaves, masters, mothers, infants, victims of the lies and cruelties that had built their world. The past itself was rising. The shadow follows. As they reached the old oak by the water's edge, Charles turned sharply. Someone was following. Through the mist, torches flickered. Colonel Pemberton's men. Their boots splashed in the mud, their dogs snarling on leashes. But behind them, unseen by mortal eyes, another presence moved, taller than any man, its shape barely human, dragging chains that clanged like thunder. Marie clutched her brother's arm. "It's here." Charles nodded grimly. "Then tonight, we end this." End of Part 8. Would you like Part 9 to focus on the Colonel's confrontation at the marsh, where the family's lies collapse in the face of both human and supernatural judgment? Part 9: The Curse at the Marsh. Studio microphone hook. Charleston's secrets had been buried in silence for nearly 2 decades. But curses do not stay quiet forever. On that fog-soaked night in the Savannah marshes, when Colonel Pemberton came to reclaim his heir, the past rose from the grave, and it demanded blood. Colonel's arrival. The air was thick with mist when Colonel Pemberton arrived, his boots sinking into the wet earth. Behind him marched 6 armed men, their torches glowing like fiery eyes in the darkness. "Find him," Pemberton barked. "Bring my son to me. No more lies. No more defiance." The hounds strained against their leashes, growling at something unseen. Their ears flattened, their tails tucked. Even beasts could sense the marsh was not empty. The siblings stand together. Charles and Marie stood under the ancient oak at the water's edge, their figures half swallowed by the fog. They did not run. They held hands, their faces pale but steady. When Colonel Pemberton saw them, his fury exploded. "You dare shame me with this charade?" he shouted. "Charles, you will return with me this instant. And that girl," his voice dripped venom, "she will be sold to the deepest plantation I can find." Charles's voice cut through the mist. "You will not touch her. She is my sister." Pemberton froze. His men glanced at one another nervously. The word sister carried weight heavier than iron. The earth trembles. Before the colonel could reply, the ground itself seemed to shift. The marsh water rippled though there was no wind. A low groan, like 1,000 voices crying out at once, rolled across the swamp. Marie clutched Charles's arm. It's here, she whispered. From the water's surface, shapes began to rise. Pale, half-formed figures, slaves in chains, mothers clutching infants, planters with hollow eyes, ghosts of Charleston's hidden history. Their faces reflected every cruelty, every betrayal, every stolen life. The men holding torches dropped them in terror. One muttered a prayer, another bolted into the fog, screaming until his voice was swallowed by the night. The colonel's defiance. But Colonel Pemberton, proud and stubborn, refused to bend. He drew his pistol, his weathered hand steady. Tricks and shadows, he growled. I bow to no curse. He raised the weapon toward Marie. Charles stepped in front of her, arms spread wide. If you fire, you kill your own blood. For a heartbeat, the colonel faltered. His eyes flickered between the boy he had raised as heir and the girl he called a slave. The resemblance was undeniable, the same features, the same fire. And in that hesitation, the marsh answered. The specter appears. The water erupted. From the dark surface rose a towering figure, taller than any man, cloaked in rags that dripped like seaweed. Chains hung from its arms, dragging across the mud with thunderous clangs. Its face was hidden, but its hollow voice echoed like a church bell. The debt must be paid. One life for the lie. The colonel's men fled in every direction. Only the colonel stood his ground, pistol aimed at the specter. This is my land, he roared. These are my children. I will not be judged by shadows. The figure lifted its chained hand and pointed, not at Charles, not at Marie, but at Colonel Pemberton himself. Judgment falls. The colonel squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing across the marsh. Smoke curled from the barrel. But the specter did not fall. Instead, the pistol rusted in the colonel's hand, crumbling into dust. Before his eyes, his proud voice broke into a scream. He staggered back as the ground beneath him turned soft, sucking him into the mire. Help me, he bellowed at his men. But none remained. Only Charles and Marie watched as their supposed father sank knee-deep, then waist-deep into the mud. The specter's voice thundered. The blood that lied is the blood that pays. With one final scream, Colonel Pemberton disappeared beneath the black water, leaving only ripples that spread across the marsh like veins. The silence after. For a long moment, there was only silence. The mist hung heavy, the night eerily still. The ghosts that had risen began to fade, their faces dissolving into the fog as though finally released. Charles and Marie clung to each other, their hearts pounding. Then the specter spoke one last time. The lie is broken, but the curse remains. Blood remembers. Blood watches. Blood waits. With that, it sank back into the water, the chains clattering as they vanished below. The Countess arrives. Moments later, a carriage appeared on the distant road. From it emerged Countess Margot de Villefort, her once radiant beauty reduced to a shadow of grief. Celeste followed, her face lined with fear and determination. Margot saw the empty space where her husband had stood. She did not ask what happened. She already knew. Her gaze moved to Charles and Marie. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, she whispered the truth aloud. My daughter. My son. Celeste stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Marie. And mine. The two mothers, bound by lies and loss, stood side by side at the marsh. Neither dared touch the children, as if afraid that claiming them would invite the curse back. The pact renewed. Charles looked between the women, then at Marie. It isn't over, he said quietly. Marie nodded. No, the curse wants more. The Countess clasped her rosary. Then we must flee Charleston. We must leave the South behind. Europe, perhaps. Somewhere this shadow cannot follow. But Celeste shook her head. Shadows don't care about oceans. The curse is not bound by place, it is bound by blood. The truth weighed on them like stone. The ominous future. That night, they returned to the Carrington estate, though none slept. The air inside the house was thick with dread. Every mirror was covered with black cloth, every candle burned low. Charles sat awake until dawn, staring at the cracked shard he still carried. In its fractured surface, he saw not his own face, but Marie's, and behind her, the faint outline of the specter, waiting. He whispered to himself, one more life. That's what it wants. And in his heart, he knew the curse had not yet chosen whose. Fire. End of part 9. Do you want part 10, the finale, to bring the story to a tragic gothic conclusion, with one final sacrifice that decides whether the curse is broken, or a more ambiguous, haunting ending where the curse lingers beyond their generation? Part 10, the last sacrifice. Studio microphone, hook. Charleston believed the curse ended when Colonel Pemberton sank into the marsh. But curses do not die so easily. They hunger. They wait. And when dawn broke over the Carrington estate, the curse had already chosen its final victim. The morning after. The house was quiet, too quiet. Shadows clung to the corners of the halls, even as sunlight tried to push through the drapes. Charles walked the estate like a ghost in his own skin. The faces of the drowned, the chains of the specter, the final scream of his father, they would not leave his mind. Marie sat by the window, pale, staring at the horizon. She had not spoken since the marsh, as if the curse had stolen her voice. Countess Margot clutched her rosary, praying under her breath. Celeste lit candles. In every room, their flames shivering as though caught in an unseen breeze. The house breathed with them. The walls groaned. The mirrors, though covered in cloth, trembled as though something on the other side pressed against them. The omen. That night, Charles dreamt of the marsh again. But this time, he was alone. The water bubbled, and the specter rose once more. Its chains clattered like thunder. The debt is not yet paid, it intoned. One must go willingly, or all shall be taken. Charles tried to speak, but his mouth filled with mud. He woke gasping, his body drenched in sweat. When he looked across the room, he saw Marie's bed empty. Marie's choice. He found her in the garden, standing barefoot in the moonlight, her nightdress fluttering in the wind. She held the cracked mirror shard in her hand. "It wants me," she whispered. "It has always wanted me. I was born from its shadow." Charles shook his head fiercely. "No, we will leave Charleston. We will leave America. We'll go where it can't follow." Marie smiled sadly. "You know it can follow anywhere. It's in our blood." Her eyes softened. "One must go willingly. You heard it too." Charles felt his knees weaken. "No, Marie, please." But she pressed the shard into his hand. "You will live. You must carry the truth. Tell the world what was hidden, what was denied. Let my death not be just a curse, but a warning." The mother's plea. When Margot and Celeste realized what Marie intended, they fell to their knees, begging her not to surrender. "You are our child," Margot wept. "I lost you once, I will not lose you again." Celeste held Marie's hands tightly. "I carried you into this world. If blood must pay, let it be mine. I am the mother, not the child." Marie shook her head gently. "It is not the parents' debt anymore. It is ours. Charles and I inherited both halves of the lie. But only one needs to pay for both." Margot clung to her daughter's dress, sobbing. But the girl's resolve was set. The walk to the marsh. Just before dawn, Marie walked barefoot back to the marsh. Charles followed, clutching the mirror shard like a talisman. Margot and Celeste trailed behind, broken but unable to stop her. The fog parted as if the swamp itself was waiting. The water stilled, and then, with a ripple, the specter rose again. Chains dragged across the mud. Its hollow eyes turned to Marie. "Do you come freely?" Her voice did not shake. "Yes. For my brother. For my mother's. For the lie that cursed us all." The specter raised one massive hand. The chains clattered, forming a path across the water. Marie turned to Charles. She cupped his face with both hands. "Live for me. Remember me. Tell the truth when others choose silence." She kissed his forehead, then stepped onto the water. The sacrifice. With each step, her figure shimmered, fading. The chains wrapped gently around her, not in violence, but almost in reverence. Charles screamed her name, but Margot and Celeste held him back, their cries joining his. Marie's face was calm, almost radiant, as the water swallowed her. The last thing they saw was her hand, raised in farewell, before it too sank beneath the surface. The specter's voice boomed one final time. "The debt is paid. The lie is buried. The curse sleeps." And then it vanished. The silence that followed. The marsh grew still. The fog lifted. For the first time in years, dawn broke clear over Charleston. Charles collapsed to his knees, the mirror shard slipping from his fingers into the mud. Margot wrapped her arms around him, her tears soaking his hair. Celeste fell to the ground, clawing at the earth, wailing her daughter's name. The curse was gone, but its victory was bitter. Epilogue. Months later, the Carrington estate was abandoned. Margot returned to France, her health failing, her soul hollow. Celeste disappeared into the Louisiana swamps, where whispers claimed she still called her daughter's name in the night. Charles grew into a man, carrying the memory like a scar. He traveled, he studied, he spoke in hushed tones of Charleston's hidden history, of slavery, betrayal, and blood debts unpaid. But he never returned to the marsh. And yet, when he looked into mirrors, sometimes he swore he saw Marie's face staring back. Not haunting, not accusing, just waiting. Clapperboard closing. Thus ends the story of Charleston's curse, and the girl who gave herself to silence it. But history has long shadows, and blood remembers. Ghost, what do you think? Was the curse truly ended, or does it wait for another generation? Loudspeaker, if you were gripped by this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historic horror stories. And leave a comment below. Do you believe in family curses? Until the next story, remember, the past is never really past.